this one is going to be about different biologies in player races in most D&D settings. First, an example. In the one homebrew game we're running, the way we have the Dragonborn work in what's called the Bound Sword setting, that the one DM, their homebrew setting, custom, whatever. In their setting, the Dragonborn are they're an artificial kind of race. They're not any kind of native natural species. They were created magically during some dragon wars millennia ago. But they're effectively humans and or demi-humans infused with draconic essence, which turns them into part dragon-like humanoids. And one of the big things is that all the various dragon types, the 5 chromatics, the 5 italics, the 5 gems, they are all kind of like their own distinct, quote, bloodlines. And they don't quote, mix. Now, some of this is going to sound a little eugenicsy, and there's no other way to put it. But something like this, I think, in other settings with in other situations with other kinds of races, like if this were purely humans and it were like nationalities, yeah, this would be pretty yikesy. But these are bloodlines from preternatural apex magical beings like dragons that all have their own distinct varieties that in dragon species don't interbreed, or I don't even think they can. Like, I don't think no, actually, come to think of it, the way those that like interbreeding different dragon species works, like even just a gold and a silver, let alone metallic and chromatic, but like 2 different dragon species trying to mate produces either no offspring, like no fertilization, no viable offspring, and in some very rare instances, just one or the other with some really mild traits from the other parent, and then every once in a while you'll get a true hybrid that's like sterile, something like that. So they are closer to their own separate species, but they're connected through their draconic essence anyway. So the way I see it for the Dragonborn, by kind of anchoring this draconic essence to a humanoid biology, there's that baseline humanoid that works and can interbreed, but the draconic essence doesn't properly mix. So how it ends up functioning is if two different Dragonborn, like a gold and a silver, if they were to produce offspring, there's a 50-50 chance of the offspring being gold or silver. It's just kind of roll the dice, blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes they might have some recessive abilities or properties from the parent that they don't match. And sometimes these types of things can manifest down the family line, like, say, a family of mostly blue Dragonborn. A few generations back, there was a black Dragonborn in the family, and then suddenly, in this current generation, either a full-on black Dragonborn is born, just because of some recessiveness, or maybe a blue Dragonborn with a mismatched acidic breath weapon, something like that. And mix and match. It's fun just to do that. But so that's how the Dragonborn work, interbreeding with each other. They're the same race. It's not interbreeding, but then because they're also effectively demi-humans, they're humanoids with draconic essence ingrained into their biology. So One of the other properties is that these dragonborn, if they were to produce offspring with like a human or a dwarf or an elf, the offspring is very likely to be a dragonborn, but say a lower chance, like a 1 out of 4 chance, might just be a human, or whatever the non-dragonborn parent is instead. And it's relatively common that human might also have a breath weapon and have some draconic abilities, or maybe have some sorcerer potential, stuff like that. And because mixing shit with dragons gets really wibbly wobbly, so it's pretty wibbly wobbly. And likewise, even 2 full dragonborn mating every once in a while might just produce a normal human. And as a result of all these like chances, like how would that influence the culture a little bit? Like, just touch on some stuff. And if it's possible for like, say, two like green dragonborn to occasionally produce a silver dragonborn just because they have one somewhere back in one of their bloodlines, I feel like they have to be relatively trusting about this type of thing. Not just accuse each other of cheating, just like, on a personal interrelationship level. So that's a little nugget of culture you can kind of derive there. Because, sometimes your child isn't necessarily going to look exactly like you or even like you expect. They're going to be a human sometimes. So I feel like there has to be a certain level of trust and acceptance and tolerance in that society, or in the Dragonborn societies. But also, as like another little feature about that is these Dragonborn are pretty like clan centric, kind of like dwarves, but I guess the closest analog I can think of is like say like Japanese noble families or medieval noble families. Like there's a central family line, and then there's like offshoots and cousins that are related to the family, and you've got like gradients like kind of sweeping out from the main line, that kind of thing. But also another little topic that these Dragonborn are related to, and I don't know why I had to explain all that shit about the Dragonborn in this setting specifically, but this is something a lot of players don't like. How for a lot of players, the fact that Dragonborn don't have tails is kind of a sticking point. And I can understand that, like having a Dragonborn with a tail, a Dragon Man with a tail, kind of completes the fantasy. Something that, you talk about a lot. You want an accurate fantasy for this character that the player enjoys. But the thing I like about Dragonborn not having tails is that Dragonborn are fully upright humanoids. A large tail doesn't do them any good and actually gets in the way. Like from a biological perspective, if you're fully upright bipedal, a tail doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't help your balance. If it's too long, you have to kind of hold it up, and it actually drags you backwards and throws your balance off. Maybe if it's a bit shorter and it's not as long as your legs, sure, it could be like fat storage and something like that, but is that going to be like worth that biological investment? Because it's a whole extra limb. It's a whole extra limb that your character has to. Hold on, I gotta change some stuff. My phone is getting hot, so I'm gonna put the air on. Sun is positioned perfectly. having a tail doesn't do a whole lot for you. If you're like an upright bipedal creature, it throws off your balance, and if it's just for fat storage, it's a whole lot of extra energy because it's a whole extra limb you have to support. And it really doesn't help you. So I like the idea of them having either really short tails or no tails at all as upright humanoids. But due to the wibbly wobbliness of the Dragonborn in the Bound Sword setting, sometimes they are born with tails, and they're usually kind of a detriment. But, they're seen as not necessarily being a chosen one, but, this Dragonborn might be a little special. They've got a little extra favor. They might, a tail is a sign of status. Or, very rarely, a Dragonborn might be born with wings, whether non-functional, fully, like vestigial, non-functional, or actually functional. And that can be really cool. Some Dragonborn get to be born with wings, and that would be a particular, bestow a particular status. But also, these traits don't necessarily get passed on either. Like, a winged Dragonborn producing offspring isn't going to guarantee winged offspring or wings in their offspring, and maybe not even a higher chance, because dragons are so connected to the prime material, the natural world. They're so ingrained with magic and innate magic, and there's a bit of a chaotic energy to that. So there's a bit of chaos in these creatures' genetics, which I think is really fun. But also, I feel like one, Dragonborn and Lizard Folk already have a lot of trouble being distinct from each other. And in the games that I play in, the Lizard Folk, specifically the Lizard Folk I play, they are much less, they're not exactly just pure upright humanoids. They do have long tails. But the Lizard Folk I play is more hunched over. He's not completely horizontal, he's more diagonal. But he is hunched over, and he uses his long tail spread out, held out behind him as a counterweight for running and balance. So he actually moves a lot more like a velociraptor, which is really fun. But usually a tail needs to have some sort of use, otherwise it's going to be vestigial. In the case of certain Dragonborn, it's fucking magic, so who cares? And then, in the case of Lizard Folk, it has use as counterbalancing, fat storage, other things, because of the way their body plans work. And then in the case of kobolds, because they're such small creatures, maybe they need that tail purely for fat storage, kind of like how geckos and stuff have it. They need an extra limb just for fat storage because they have such little body mass elsewhere. They can't afford to have it clustered around their organs, which actually is, I think, a big thing for small lizards and geckos and stuff. They don't store a gecko or other lizards that people keep as pets. Getting obese is a big problem because fat encroaches on their organs and prevents them from functioning. They can't store fat very easily the way mammals can. So that's the thing. But and then certain other races that also have tails, say tabaxi or tieflings. With tieflings, it's devilish inheritance. It's fucking magic. We don't have to talk about it. And they're kind of just there as sometimes an extra limb that can do stuff, but they're there to complete the silhouette. Same thing with tabaxi. They don't need a tail for balance, though an argument could be made for when a tabaxi is climbing through trees or in other just generally climbing. Because, they're a very climbing-centric race. They get a climbing speed as part of their race, as a racial trait. So that's a thing. But as far like when it comes to tails, there usually has to be some sort of reason for it. You can't just have a tail for no reason. Sometimes that reason is just magic, but no. I like things to kind of make sense from a biological perspective, at least if you squint.